This episode brought to you by Discovery Bank. Ready to experience the future of banking now? Get on board. Discovery Bank Limited is an authorized FSP 48657. T's and C's apply. So, you think you want to be a CEO?
You know you don't have all the answers. Very often you've got incomplete information. There are very many people in the organization, on the board, that know a lot more than you do.
The power, the status, the money.
The first option, which we did contemplate, was the legal option. How do you pursue your rights in terms of interdicts and all of those sorts of things? And at the end, we fell back on what we believed was the better way. We decided that we were going to speak with the other party that was agitating.
Is it all it's cracked up to be?
One of the managers said, "My daughter does art at school, and she wanted me to give you her painting of Starry Night that she had done. Because she says when she looks up, what she can see now is that there are so many more possibilities for her."
Bertina Engelbrecht told her parents at the age of 3 that she wanted to be a lawyer. She wanted to change the world, and the law seemed like the right place to do that. That bubble has since burst, but she's not lost the desire to change the world. In January 2022, she became the first black woman to become chief executive of a large South African retailer. And as chief executive of Clicks, she finds herself as a role model for young women considering for the first time that they too might one day just reach the corner office. I'm Bruce Whitfield. So, what does it take to be a CEO?
That's an interesting question. I think a very healthy dose of humility, because we don't always get it right. Our scorecard, if you will, is available not just in a bottom drawer, but really for the public to see, because as a listed company, of course, we've got a report every 6 months. And then I think you really do have, in today's world, I can remember when I was much younger and I was thinking the corner office means you don't really do any work. And in reality, I think a CEO today, it's pretty long hours. So I think you've got to have stamina and you've got to have resilience. I think that's probably what it takes to be a CEO. And probably you've got to be pretty good with people, really getting them to bring the best of themselves forward and to work with one another in the playpen all together very, very nicely.
Humility isn't often a descriptor that is associated with chief executives. Very often, chief executives, very nice people, they have to have a very high level of self-belief, self-confidence. That can translate, in some cases, not all, into very big and sometimes very messy egos. They're always very interesting. How do you maintain humility in a role where so much is on your shoulders and so much is required on you from a leadership position? How does that humility play out?
I think the way in which humility plays out is that you don't have all the answers. Very often you've got incomplete information. There are very many people in the organization, on the board, that know a lot more than you do. And so I think what humility does, it really allows you to acknowledge that in a way that you draw on the expertise and the inputs of a myriad of other people. And then, of course, even in your home life, people go and shop in our kind of store. And so they give you, friends and family give you a whole lot of feedback. And so I think humility just keeps your feet on the ground as well, so that you don't take all of the hype about, being in the corner office too much to heart. It's just a job that's a little bit different from what many other people in the organization does. But at the end of the day, it's a job. And I think one has to acknowledge that.
When did you start first seriously contemplating that corner office, you referred to it earlier, that corner office may be a place to which you would aspire one day?
I never, to be honest, aspired to be a CEO. I looked at the guys in the corner office and, back in the day when life was very different, you had a driver and the newspaper got delivered to you and the tea trolley came around, at least at 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock. And just the opportunity to sit down and read your paper. I thought, wow, that's great. But I can remember my parents actually tell me, I was 3 years old when I first said I wanted to be a lawyer. And that's really, I think, what I've always wanted to be my whole life. I wanted to be a lawyer. I thought what a lawyer did was to represent people. And what a lawyer did was to ensure, that there was equity and that you could pursue a result through the judicial system. And based on our courts over the last year.
When did you wake up to that reality? When did that bubble burst? When did that bubble burst for you, the law bubble?
Well, you know what? When I was at university, I mean, this is very, very many years ago, but Professor Vian just had written his tome on labor relations. And I thought, for the first time, I really thought that there was a branch of the law that could respond to the question of not, how do you treat everybody equally, but how do you treat people equitably? And to me, that's a critically important part probably of my own makeup about, I thought that the law really could be applied to create more equitable outcomes in society.
But you went as far as a master's in law. You took it a long way. Did you ever practice law?
I practiced law, yes. I mean, I articled. That's a job that teaches you a whole great deal about humility. And I worked in practice for probably about 2 to 3 years. And I pursued my master's degree. I originally actually wanted to do a master's degree in labor law, but ended up in corporate commercial law. And every single day in all of the things that I do, I would say I use a branch of the law.
Some of the biggest white-collar criminals in South African history have been lawyers. I just thought I'd mention that. And again, the law has provided a very useful conduit into corporate. What was the conduit then into corporate? Because you were advising clients, no doubt, and you must have looked across the fence and thought, that grass looks a little bit greener.
Well, I actually started in 1990 in the corporate world and in Transnet. And I started as a researcher, and it was a very interesting time. This was just before, the unbannings and the release of the political prisoners. And I did a little document every Friday, which was about, what was happening, and this whole thing about the equidistance between the corporate politicians and the law and civil society. And the question really that we all had at the time was, what did we need to do as corporates to, if you will, reduce the equidistance that we had relative to employee representatives to government? And we saw that there was an opportunity, I suppose, to really work more collaboratively with government. And how did you go about and do that? And I remember one Friday, for some reason, I was late and I had all of these calls and people were like, where is this document? And that's for the first time that I realized I probably had a bit of a knack in terms of writing. And through writing, persuading people to maybe just look at the world slightly differently.
Now that you sit at the opposite side of the table as the employer, how is your attitude towards the labor law, which so inspired you in the early days? I recall Tito Mboweni, the lovely late Tito Mboweni, bemoaning the labor law when he was at the Reserve Bank because he couldn't hire the experts he wanted to hire. He was required to do employment equity, and when somebody wasn't pulling their weight, he couldn't just fire them as much as he wanted to. It's very different, isn't it, being at the helm of an organization when the labor law could be used against you?
Well, interesting enough, I know lots of corporates talk about people being the single greatest asset. And if companies thought about that really carefully, they'd realize that is the truth. Whether or not you're talking about people at your head office, that's coming up with more creative ways around making decisions around product design or, a marketing campaign, or the people that are standing behind your till and really interfacing with your customer. At the end, it all comes back to people. I read a case study the other day about Walmart and just some of the things that they had done. And they really built the resurgence of Walmart on the principle of really being inclusive and ensuring that their people felt treasured and valued within the organization. When I was in ER or employee relations, we had a saying that said, you get the staff you deserve. And so in a lot of respects, what this company has done, it's allowed me the opportunity to really put into practice a lot of the things that I believed in from my days as a lawyer. And I'll give you an example. I remember when I joined here, we made the decision, and we didn't have a lot of money. Our share price was 9 Rand 56 when I joined. And we had a very small budget in HR. And I remember we just made the decision that we were going to put in place an employee wellness program. And it was very, very novel at the time. And we needed 3.5 million Rand. And David Neal said to me, look, you can get this, but you're going to need to find the savings in your own team. And we worked at that. And And really what I would say to our employee wellness program is the most valued employee benefit by staff. It is one of the it is the most utilized employee wellness program. And that is because we're not allowing somebody else to just run with this program. We see the benefit for employees, and employees see the benefit themselves. And it was the same, we worked from 2011. We worked for 2 years on our employee share ownership program. And today it's still considered to be one of the most profitable employee share ownership programs for staff. At the end, we paid out just over 3 billion rand in terms of the employee share ownership program. And what we had promised shareholders in return for that was that we would take the intervening 7-year period to really work on all of the elements of our, people capital processes within the organization around, building affiliation. And I can tell you, when we started out and you'd call somebody from some really fancy FMCG company or some fancy retail company, and you said, we've got a great job for you, they would laugh and say, not your company. Today, it's the reverse. Actually, loads of people from some of the most preeminent companies call us and say, we'd like to work for you. Because what we've learned in the marketplace is you're the kind of company where, as an employee, I can make a difference, and where you take into account and you value my inputs. And so I do think there's no difference between what I believe then and what we put into practice in our organization, every single day.
And it sounds wonderful and warm and cozy, but you cannot have an employee-employer relationship without some disagreement, without some conflict. How do you navigate that? Because some companies are better at it than others. What's your secret sauce?
I think it's about transparency and about honesty. When we had the Tresemme incident, which wasn't really our incident, but we take accountability for it.
Tresemme was what was normal hair. It was listed on the bottle as, this is normal hair. And activists went, hold on a second. What do you mean by normal hair? And suddenly you were carrying the product, therefore it became your fault, as opposed to the product developers, yes.
Yeah, either the product developers or the people that put the marketing content together from the supplier side. But, you can't, I think, step away from your accountability. At the end of the day, we carried the product. The product was on our marketing sites. And so the first thing that we actually did was we communicated with the board. We communicated with staff because, in all honesty, we ourselves felt that we'd let ourselves down. And the question was, how do we turn this around? And we could have taken one of two options. The first option, which we did contemplate, was a legal option. How do you pursue your rights in terms of interdicts and all of those sorts of things? And at the end, we fell back on what we believed was the better way. We decided that we were going to speak with the other party that was agitating. And it turned out to be a really fantastic opportunity to engage and talk about some of the things that we did within our organization. What people were saying to us. And the previous CEO and I met with over 200 different stakeholders over a week-long period, from the Human Rights Commission to political parties to community organizations. And it was tough to hear some of the initial comments. And what was really, I thought, inspiring at the end of it was for all of them to say, you do fantastic work, but it's the greatest secret. So, you really need to talk a little bit more about some of the things that you do. And we have taken some learnings out of that, Bruce, where we've become a little less insular than we've been as an organization. And we are trying to step a little bit more into the light.
So often when companies hit a reputational issue, the first people go are the lawyers. And they say, don't engage, don't admit anything, lawyer up, send letters. That's their incentive. That's the way they're trained. Go back with big, scary teeth and bite hard. You can do that, and you may win a legal battle over a 6-month period, by which time the queues are a bit shorter. The customers have gone elsewhere. Smart marketers in rivals have outmaneuvered and outpaced you. You chose, I think, the smarter approach, which was, that was a mess. We shouldn't have done that. Let's be human about this, and let's respond to the humanity of the complaint. When you, at any point going through it, did you say, hold on a second, this is just activists being activists, or did you take it as a serious thing that people were genuinely, normal had been appearing on shampoo bottles in time immemorial. There was something that suddenly this was a catalyst for, and you were taking the fall for it. That must have been slightly annoying, surely.
It was slightly annoying, but there was a truth in there. And, I think that what we did is we faced into the truth of all of it. And many people that we engaged with said, we see clicks as part of our family. That was the really humbling part, and they felt that we had let ourselves and them down. And, Bruce, we took about a year where we reviewed everything within our organization in terms of our marketing content. For a whole year, we had no human models or AI generated models as an example, and we really worked on how do you create greater inclusivity in terms of the panel within the organization that would review all of the marketing material. And I think that stood us in very good stead.
Sometimes painful, but yeah, the lessons, as long as they're applied and remembered, they become quite useful. Clicks went through a really bad patch, and I recall the CEO, Trevor Honeysett, rebranding it New Clicks, and not very much changed, and the share price continued to deteriorate. You joined at R9.56. I'm not sure where the bottom was. It was around R6 as I remember it. Today, the share price sits at R246.76, my last check. The turnaround comes with the appointment of David Neil, who is foreign. He is English. He comes from the United Kingdom. He's worked for Boots in the United Kingdom. He takes a look at that model and he says there are aspects of the Boots operating model, the supermarket-style pharmacy business, which are actually perfectly required in South Africa, and starts on the long journey of putting a pharmacy in every Clicks branch. David Neil, I remember having a conversation with him once and saying every other CEO is looking for opportunities to expand offshore, is looking for opportunity to buy assets elsewhere. And he said, why would I do that? There's plenty of opportunity here. It was counterintuitive at the time. Do you still ascribe to that philosophy?
Yes, by and large. I mean, if you reflect on how we have grown, it's essentially we have continued to pursue an organic growth path. There have been many opportunities for us to acquire businesses, and we've chosen not to do that. And I think if you were a shareholder, you would say the investment that you'd made in our company was right, because I think acquisitions are fraught with all sorts of challenges, in terms of integration. You've got systems issues, you've got people issues, and very often the benefits that you thought that you would extract comes with great challenges, and it's very hard one to ultimately achieve that. And so we've always kind of banked on ourselves in terms of identifying the opportunities and growing organically. Today, of course, our market share in pharmacy is just under 25%. So between 2004, when we opened up our first pharmacy in Sea Point here in the Western Cape, to today, I think it's a phenomenal story of growth, which, as you correctly say, David was he played an incredible role in that. And I think we still have quite a pathway to grow in South Africa. We, of course, have a few operations outside of South Africa, in Southern Africa, mainly Namibia and Botswana, and in Eswatini, 2 stores in Lesotho. But really the bulk, over 90% of our business is within South Africa, and we think that there are still phenomenal opportunities to growth.
It served Shoprite well, it served Capitec well, it served you well, and many others as well, as expansion, not at all costs, but a logical, considered approach to finding opportunity. When opportunities are presented to you, how do you decide whether or not to go for them? I mean, clearly, if a really great deal did turn up, you wouldn't be averse to it. But what is your chief consideration when, and I'm sure you have lots of people knocking on your door, somebody says, hello, I've got a pharmacy chain of 20 pharmacies. I think you should be buying us, for example.
Most of the opportunities that some competitors have pursued and taken on board were presented to us first. And we go through a very rigorous process of evaluating those. First and foremost, I think one of our questions is, would it meet our internal rate of return? So we're generally looking for a 22% rate of return. Secondly, we have to believe that we are positioned to be able to extract value from it, and that in our hands, it would do much better than in the hands of the current owner. So that's a key consideration for us. We do look at scale of the business and the quality of the existing management team within that business. And then we do very deep due diligences, because what you don't want is to find a whole lot of gremlins. So It's fine if you know about that up front, and you can deal with that as part of the commercial terms in terms of just getting rid of all of those sorts of things. There have been opportunities in the last sort of 2 to 3 years, Bruce, that we have pursued and taken on board, and maybe I'll just take you through those. The first, of course, was MChem. People asked, why did we buy MChem? MChem was about acquiring a new format that would allow us to be able to expand a format that we thought would not cannibalize our existing Click stores, and it has proven to be that. We thought that it had the potential to grow to 10 or 20 such stores, that each of those stores could probably be north of 50 million up to, MChem itself does about 265, 280 million rand in turnover per annum. It would solidify and enhance our credentials as a healthcare partner. And then, of course, it was really very central to healthcare itself, which we see as the anchor of our business. We acquired a pharmacy software business called Leap. Today, it is the only modern pharmacy software system, because all pharmacy software systems in South Africa were developed for the independent pharmacy market. And of course, today, the market is essentially, the majority of the market is...
it's in your hands, in Dis-Chem's hands.
Is serviced by corporate pharmacy.
There's lots of criticism of that and saying you destroyed the local pharmacy market. Well, industries evolve and change, and consolidation of industries brings buying power, it brings all sorts of incentives. I miss my local pharmacy. Nice man behind the counter knew you before you walked in through the door. It's a little less personal than perhaps it used to be. But certainly there is an argument to be made for efficiency and for scale.
And for greater affordability for the consumer. I think, what we have pursued, as I'm sure other corporates as well, is really an understanding that you are duty-bound as the pharmacist to offer the customer the least expensive generic alternative that you've got on shelf. And what that does, it extends the medical aid benefit of the customer patient. And what it does, it makes medicines overall much more affordable. So I think, there are some of those benefits for the customer.
But you have made small bolt-on acquisitions. I was talking to Bertina Engelbrecht, the chief executive of ShopRite. You'll know him well. He is sniffing in your patch, opening up pharmacies more and more within ShopRite. And I said to him, why are you going laterally in the economy, opening up pet stores? And they got out of Hungry Lion, but at one stage they were in the fast food market. And they are increasingly playing in other territories. And they will probably do very well at it. And in some cases, setting up standalone versions of their stores, the liquor stores like many others have done too. And they said, well, in a slow economy like South Africa, where you can't grow your margin, you can't get the volume growth that you need in order to satisfy shareholders, you need to be expanding laterally. Has that temptation ever grabbed you? Because you've got fixed retail offerings, you've got some electrical goods, you've got over-the-counter medications and lotions and potions and all sorts of other things, household shampoos and stuff. You have some electronics on the shelves. I once said to David Neal, it feels like going into a general dealer's. He didn't like that. And then, of course, the pharmacy business. Is there a temptation to say we can actually take this operating model and move laterally in a slow economy? Or a bit like David Neal before you, saying, we don't need to do that because the pharmacy draws the customers into the back and we tempt them with goods on the way out.
Well, I think there's a case to be made for both. What we've been able to do is to very successfully use pharmacy as the anchor, to expand on the number of pharmacy sites that we've got, to think about how you expand the service offering within pharmacy itself, like things, for example, through the virtual doctor network that we've got, through our clinic offering where we've now got 226 clinics, through supporting vaccinations, primary health care, those sorts of things. Because what we've got is, in terms of our model, we know and understand what we need to do to convert that pharmacy customer into a front shop shopper. And so the journey that the customer traverses through the store is very intentionally set up to ensure that the customer passes through a number of departments and that there's a slight little temptation for them to put one more item in the basket. And so we track that. Our target is actually for 65% conversion, and we generally get over 80% conversion from the pharmacy through to the front shop.
From the start, the ambition was clear: to build a bank that could be more than a bank. One that rewards better decisions, connects the ecosystems that shape your life, and gets smarter the more you engage. That ambition is now a reality. With Discovery Bank, your entire financial life comes together in one intelligent platform, accessed through a single app. It understands your behavior, works harder for you over time, and helps you build your financial future with confidence. Discovery Bank, the future of banking. Now.
I asked you earlier, what does it take to be a CEO? What does it mean to you to be a CEO?
I hadn't appreciated, when people spoke before about things like representativity, I didn't truly understand what that meant. And I can remember the day after I was appointed and I came up the staircase and I went to where I normally sit. And there were all these women within the organization, and they came to sing to me. And I even now I get gooseflesh when I think about it. I hadn't realized the power of representativity. And I've had so many young professional women write to me and say to me, you know what, we think it is possible now. I have needed to be very different from I was before, Bruce, because I'm more introverted. And I have got on my desk at work, I've got a painting of Starry Night. And I went through to the Free State, I think it was, and one of the managers said, my daughter does art at school, and she wanted me to give you her painting of Starry Night that she had done. Because she says when she looks up, what she can see now is that there are so many more possibilities for her to achieve the goals that she has set out for herself in life. And I think it's just the fact that that you can see it is possible. And I think that's what I think the role has meant for me. I think the role has meant for me that you can inspire, you can show people that it is possible, and that you don't need to change the essence of who you are in order for you to be a CEO.
And when it comes then to the way in which you structure your leadership teams, how has that then changed? Because I recall Nikki Newton-King taking over from Russell Loubser at the JSE many years ago now. And suddenly the executive team was almost exclusively women. And I can't recall the response when I went, was it by design or was it simply by talent? But probably a blend of both. But do you actively, now that you've seen the impact that it has on people, and particularly young people who go, that is possible for me, that you actively pursue promoting women in particular?
I don't think that you need to actively pursue. I think what you need to do is open the recruitment panel's eyes to the fact that they need to be open in the way in which they are assessing the candidates. And I think that's actually what leads to it. I can think of no senior man or woman that wants to be appointed purely because they're filling a demographic box. I think that the quality is there. What we need to do is we need to be open to the possibility of the quality and really challenge ourselves when we are evaluating the candidates. Today, I'm incredibly proud of some of the women. I mean, our largest pharmaceutical DC up in Roodepoort is run by a woman. And it's not because she's a woman, it was because she was the best person for the job. Today, our head of legal is a woman. And we didn't look for a woman. We appointed the best person for the job. So I think there is that. Of course, I think that the fact that you can see it is possible and that there's all of this quality out there just means that you look much more carefully at both people within and people outside of the organization for the quality. Because, what you don't want to be is to be an organization where you're only recruiting and promoting from within. I think you lose out on alternative lived experiences and perhaps different perspectives that enrich the quality of your decision making within your organization.
As an introvert, as a self-confessed introvert, are there mornings where you wake up and you go, I do not want to go in and be asked more questions, to be put under pressure to deal with X, Y, and Z? I would rather just work from home and not go in, because so many CEOs are A-types who are, garrulous, or they've worked on being charming and charming the room and stuff. I don't know if you feel the need to do that, actually. You're quite happy in your own skin.
Yes, I am. I mean, I was very fortunate. I grew up in a household where my parents always believed, that they encouraged us and encourage us to really do well and to work hard. And during the whole of COVID, I came to work. I was one of those people that came to work. I love the idea of coming to work. I think for any of us that has gotten to this level, we probably do put on our game face. You sort of like, I've got to put on my game face. I've got to go and meet with people now. I've got to represent the company. And that means that I have to be more, I have to lean in more. I've got to be more externally focused than what perhaps I am. So I think there's probably that. But many evenings I go home and all I really want to do is I just want to go and watch something completely nonsense, I want to watch the family meeting at 8 p.m.
Those can go on a bit. They can go on a bit. So you've got too much time on your hands, clearly. But are there days where and Edward Kieswetter was wonderful on this. He said every day he had dark thoughts of walking away. There are trials and tribulations in leadership of any kind, whether it's in the public or private sector. And there must be days where you go, what was I thinking when I accepted this job?
I'd be honest, I've never had a thought like that. And I haven't. Every day when I come to work, I think to myself, really, I've got to do my best, because every day we've got about 20,000 people who, despite the fact that maybe their roof was blown over and that they had to walk in the rain to get to work and that they were wet by the time they came there, every single day, they try to do their best. And so I do feel that kind of level of responsibility of saying I've got to do my best for them. And that means showing up, and really trying to do the best that you could do. So no, every day I'm truly every day humbled. Maybe there's something about, in the legal profession, there's never any right or wrong. It's just, how do you present the facts on behalf of your client? And I think as a lawyer, you're sort of trained to see all the different perspectives in terms of charting your way through it. And then in retail, every day the consumer changes, the competitor changes, the market changes. And so in retail, you really have to learn to be incredibly resilient. And that's a competency that is in very high demand and that we actively try and shape within the retail environment is really resilience. In fact, it's one of our values as an organization, resilience.
Everyone talks about resilience, and then you get into times like we have been in 2026, where the world truly has gone mad. Every year you go to New Year's Eve and you go, thank goodness that one's over. This one has got to be better. And then it says to you, surprise, and something comes from left field and causes havoc. And we're in one of those, another one of those phases right now. How do you stay resilient in a world that is testing on every single level, where your staff are facing huge inflationary pressures, where they're facing pressures at home, where on that journey to work, they're not safe in many cases, where that brutal reality, that daily reality of lived lives, your customers' lives, they have tough lives. How do you stay resilient in the face of that tsunami of danger?
I have a little statement on my WhatsApp. It says, this too shall pass. And that's the way that I look at life, because, when you are in a crisis, it seems like this will never pass. And when you think about it, sometimes even just a month or a week later, you realize it has passed. I think just in general, with the passage of time, you realize that what you thought was a calamity actually isn't. And what you think is a tragedy for yourself personally, there are many people that have got much greater tragedies than that. This has been a particularly tough year for us, Bruce. I mean, you look at the share price, you look at one of the data bits that we were looking at over the last sort of, month was around credit card usage and the transition from debit cards to credit cards. And you can just see how people are using their credit cards in the last sort of 7 to 10 days of the month. People are struggling. You see it actually in your inability to drive volume upwards, because people really just have enough money for one or two items in their basket. And I think it is tough. It is really, really tough. But what we are focusing on is that in August of 2028, our company will be 60 years old. And it's that sense of the legacy of previous generations, of the founders of this organization that had such an incredible vision, that we see ourselves really as the stewards and custodians of the legacy of a company that will survive 60 years, but we are hoping that we can be part of building an organization that will stand strong when it turns 100 years old.
This too shall pass. There's a wonderful video of Tom Hanks talking to a group of similarly aged actors, and they say to him, "So Tom, how are you always so optimistic about the world?" And he says, "Well, I've just got this attitude of this too shall pass." He said, "When I was young and I was trying to get the scripts and I wasn't getting the roles and I wasn't getting the girls and I wasn't getting invited to the awards, I had this approach that this too will pass. This too will pass." And then it did. And then he got the scripts and he got the awards and he got the accolades and he's the most loved man in Hollywood. And he says, "This too shall pass. This too shall pass." The good times are not permanent. The bad times aren't permanent. It is about riding each cycle as best you can and making sure you come out of it better at the end.
Yeah, and not to be short-sighted. When you're going through it, not to take short-term decisions. And that is why I like the idea of focusing on this company will be 60, but really what we are wanting is for this company to be 100 years old. And when you think of it through that particular lens, I think the decisions that you make are not for today and tomorrow. It's for the long term.
Being a CEO is about learning constantly and consistently, appreciating that you don't know everything and nor do you need to pretend to. The gut response to a crisis isn't always the best response. Winning can take many different forms, and sometimes taking a step back and using a crisis to improve your business is more valuable than victory in the courts. And it's about more than the income statement and the balance sheet. Yes, those are critical. It's also about the example you set as the person at the top. The Click's Chief Executive, Bertina Engelbrecht. This episode of So You Think You Want to Be a CEO is powered by Discovery Bank. Discovery Bank is an authorized FSP 48657. T's and C's apply.